My sister stole my identity and destroyed my credit. Then, she acted like the victim. When I pressed charges, now the whole family thinks I'm heartless. I used to believe that blood was sacred, that somewhere in the marrow of family ties lived an unspoken vow: we protect our own, even from themselves. It was a belief passed down like a relic, something my mother whispered over bedtime prayers and my father reinforced through the quiet strength of consistency. We fight, we forgive, we move on, because we're family. That was before my sister hollowed out my name, wore it like a stolen coat, and left me exposed beneath a cold sky of ruined credit and scorched trust. The first clue was subtle, a bill in the mail I didn't recognize. At first, I chalked it up to a clerical error, a misplaced statement. It was addressed to me, but the card was from a bank I'd never opened an account with. It lingered on the kitchen counter, a seed of confusion nestled among grocery lists and subscription reminders. I paid it no mind. Not then. If only I had. That single piece of mail was the canary in the coal mine, gasping in the silence of what was about to implode. Within weeks, the strange letters multiplied. Phone calls began, each one a slow drip of dread. Polite voices turned firm, then hostile. "We've tried to contact you," they'd say. "Your payment is overdue." I would stare at the statement amounts, $3,000 here, $5,400 there, and feel my pulse climb like a warning. I wasn't behind on anything. I lived modestly, paid everything off on time, had carefully built my credit to reflect a life of caution and responsibility. That life was now unraveling, thread by thread, in front of my eyes. The spiral was swift and merciless. A credit check confirmed the worst. My score had plummeted by over 200 points. Collections agencies were circling. There were multiple accounts I had never opened, cards issued in my name, addresses that weren't mine. Someone had ransacked my financial identity like a thief in the night. No, not someone. It didn't take long to trace it back to her, Emily. It wasn't even hidden well. The mailing addresses linked to her apartment, purchases in her neighborhood, a $900 charge at a boutique I knew she loved, a loan application signed with my name and her handwriting, messy, hurried, but unmistakably hers. There were digital fingerprints everywhere, as if she hadn't even tried to cover her tracks, or perhaps believed I'd never dare to chase them. I confronted her the way older siblings are taught to confront younger ones, quietly, calmly, still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a reasonable explanation. I drove to her apartment on a rainy Thursday evening, the kind where the sky seems bruised and the clouds hang heavy like guilt. She answered the door with mascara smudged beneath her eyes, the remnants of a day not well spent. Her apartment was a collage of unopened bills, crumpled takeout bags, and a sadness so dense it felt alive. "Did you open accounts in my name?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. She froze, eyes wide, then narrowed, a dozen emotions flashing behind them like lightning behind a storm cloud. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she whispered. There it was. Not denial, not outrage, just quiet confirmation, a plea dressed as an excuse. I felt something inside me fracture. The silence that followed was worse than any scream, because it was filled with all the things we couldn't unsay. I had been her protector once, her confidant, her shield against the world. But now she had turned me into collateral damage. "I was desperate," she said finally, voice cracking. "I was behind on rent, and I couldn't get approved for anything. I thought you wouldn't notice. Or maybe you'd understand." Understand? I had built everything from nothing. My job, my savings, my credit. Each piece hard-won, carved from long nights and sacrificed weekends. And she thought I'd understand? "I didn't mean harm," she repeated like a prayer. "You have your life together. I don't. I just needed a chance." That line, it stayed with me, long after I walked out of her apartment with shaking hands and a heart too heavy to carry. You have your life together. As if that made me responsible for her choices. As if my stability was an invitation for exploitation. The decision to press charges was not made in anger. It was made after countless nights staring at the ceiling staring back, offering no solace. I spent hours on the phone with banks, disputing charges, filling out fraud reports, faxing documents to creditors who didn't care that it was my sister who had done this. I watched my financial future collapse like a house of cards, and still, I hesitated. I didn't want her to go to jail. I didn't want this to become a criminal case. But the damage was irreparable, and she refused to make it right. I needed something official, something that would stop the bleeding. When the charges were filed, it was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. The explosion was swift. Emily called my mother crying, told her I was trying to ruin her life, that I was being cruel, that I hadn't even tried to help. My mother called me, voice sharp with disappointment. "She's your sister," she hissed, as though I'd forgotten. "How could you do this to her? How could she do this to me?" I said. But they weren't listening. They had already chosen sides. It was surreal, watching the narrative twist around me like a noose. My aunts, uncles, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions. Accusations flew like daggers. I was called selfish, vindictive, heartless. No one wanted to talk about the identity theft. No one wanted to know how long I had spent sorting through the wreckage she'd left behind. They only saw headlines. Sibling presses charges against sibling. That was enough to crucify me. I was uninvited from family events. Group chats grew quiet. My name became a whisper, a cautionary tale. Emily, ever the performer, leaned into the role of tragic victim. She cried on command. She spoke in soft, wounded tones. She posted vague statuses online about being betrayed by those closest to you. She weaponized vulnerability, and the audience applauded. Meanwhile, I suffered in silence. My credit remained decimated. I had to move apartments because I couldn't get approved for a renewal. I watched interest rates devour my savings. My mental health crumbled under the strain. But I said nothing, because if I defended myself, I only looked more guilty. I found myself apologizing for needing justice, for daring to protect what I had built, for not letting love blind me to harm. One night, I stood in my bathroom, staring into the mirror. My face looked older, tired, not just from the insomnia, but from the weight of betrayal. I touched the reflection like it might dissolve. Who was I now? Not the good sibling, not the responsible one, just a pariah branded heartless by the people who should have had my back. I never imagined a courtroom would be the place I'd face my sister. But life has a way of forcing confrontation when you've run out of places to hide. When the judge asked if I recognized the defendant, I said yes, my voice steady. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I told the truth, plain and brutal, letting it hang in the air like smoke. Emily didn't look at me once. Not when I described the accounts she opened. Not when I explained the financial consequences. Not even when I said I had loved her once. She sat there with tears in her eyes, the perfect image of remorse, while I was cast as the cold one for demanding accountability. I walked out of that courtroom with no victory, only silence. Justice, if you could call it that, was a sterile thing. It didn't return what was taken. It didn't mend relationships. It didn't heal. It just existed. A sterile placeholder for something far more complex. I tell myself I did the right thing. That protecting your peace is worth the cost. But some nights, when the silence is loud and the loneliness creeps in, I wonder, what kind of world punishes those who draw boundaries? What kind of family praises deception and vilifies truth? But this isn't the end. No, this is only the beginning of the reckoning. It started with a voicemail I didn't expect. A flat mechanical tone announced the message. And then my mother's voice spilled out, frayed with grief but still laced with something colder beneath the sorrow. "Your grandfather passed. The funeral is Friday. You should come, if you still care." I listened to it twice. Not for clarity, her words were perfectly clear, but for something I could never name. Perhaps I hoped to hear regret tucked in the spaces between syllables. I didn't. There was only blame, tightly coiled and aimed directly at me, embedded in those final 5 words. "If you still care." A blade disguised as an invitation. I hadn't seen my grandfather in nearly a year, not since the unraveling began. He had always been a quiet man, more present in gesture than in speech. He once spent an entire weekend building me a desk from scratch because I mentioned offhandedly I needed one for college. That was how he showed love, not through praise or words, but action. He never took sides during family disputes. At least, he hadn't when he was alive. Now he was gone, and with him vanished the last thread of neutrality in a family that had already chosen to exile me. Still, I felt obligated to go. Not for my mother, not for Emily, but for him. For the man who had taught me that doing the right thing rarely came with applause. I arrived early on the day of the funeral, dressed in black that clung to me like a shadow. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of lilies and loss. The chapel was hushed, murmurs trapped beneath vaulted ceilings as mourners filtered in. Familiar faces turned toward me as I entered, then turned away just as quickly, like moths catching flame. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was holding up. I moved through the room like a ghost in my own family's memory. And then I saw her. Emily stood near the front pew, flanked by my mother and our Aunt Marianne. She wore a demure black dress and a pearl necklace she didn't own last year, likely purchased with someone else's money if the pattern held. Her makeup was immaculate, not a trace of the messy girl I had confronted months ago. Her expression was subdued, respectful, even angelic to the casual observer. But when our eyes met, something flickered there, sharp and deliberate. It wasn't grief. It was a quiet warning. You don't belong here anymore. The service began. Words were spoken, hymns sung, memories recited like rosaries. I listened, but felt removed, as though watching a movie I had once loved but now could barely remember. When it came time for family to speak, Emily rose. She moved to the lectern with rehearsed poise and began to talk about our grandfather, their special bond, his quiet kindness, how he'd supported her through hard times. Her voice trembled just enough to appear genuine. He believed in me, she said, glancing at the audience but not at me, even when others didn't. The implication hung in the air like smoke. My stomach churned. She was turning the funeral into a stage, another scene in her carefully constructed tragedy. I gripped the edge of the pew, fingers white from pressure, and reminded myself that silence was its own form of dignity, that I wouldn't stoop to spectacle, not here, not in front of him. Afterward, the family gathered at the reception hall, a rented space beside the cemetery lined with buffet tables and awkward small talk. I lingered near the back, sipping bad coffee and wondering if anyone would approach. They didn't. Even those I'd once considered close, the cousins I babysat, the uncle who'd taught me to drive, avoided my gaze as if guilt were contagious. I wasn't just estranged, I was radioactive. Eventually I slipped outside. The air was cold, clouds bruised above, threatening rain. I walked toward the edge of the property, where a patch of overgrown grass marked the transition from manicured grounds to wild thicket. I needed space, silence, a reprieve from the performance inside. That was when she followed me. I heard the crunch of gravel before I saw her. Emily appeared beside me, hands folded neatly, the portrait of solemnity. She said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch until it throbbed. "You came," she said finally, as though surprised. "I came for him," I replied. Her lips tightened, a flicker of something passing across her face. "Guilt? No, calculation." "I didn't think you'd show your face," she said softer this time, but the venom dripped beneath the words. "I could say the same to you." Her expression hardened. "I'm the one who still talks to this family. You're the one who ran away." "I didn't run," I said. "I was pushed." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Is that what you're telling yourself now? That you're some kind of martyr?" I turned to face her fully. Her eyes held that same self-pitying glint they always did when confronted. The same look she wore when the consequences of her actions caught up to her. "You stole my name," I said, my voice low, steady. "You ruined my credit, lied to the banks, forged my signature, and then cried until everyone believed you were the victim. And now you want to talk to me about family?" Her eyes flashed. "I made a mistake. You made choices, repeatedly." We stood there in silence, the wind pressing between us like a wall. For a moment the mask slipped. Her shoulders sagged. Her gaze dropped. "I was drowning," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." "You could have asked. You could have told me the truth, but you didn't. You pretended everything was fine while gutting my life behind my back." A muscle in her jaw twitched. "I didn't think you'd say yes. You always made me feel like a failure." "That's not true, isn't it?" Her voice rose now, sharp with resentment. "You were always perfect. The straight A student, the one with a plan. You got praised for breathing, I got punished for trying. This isn't about who got more gold stars. This is about right and wrong." I stepped closer, each word a quiet explosion. "You didn't fail. You lied. You stole. And then you blamed me for holding you accountable." She shook her head, stepping back as though my truth might burn her. "You don't get it. You never did. You think everything is black and white." "No," I said. "I just don't pretend gray means forgiveness." She looked away then, toward the building, toward the family inside that still held her close, still shielded her from the consequences she refused to face. I saw the decision form behind her eyes. Not to apologize, not to change, but to retreat. "You're never going to let this go," she said. "No," I answered without hesitation. "Because I have to live with what you did every single day. You get sympathy, I get silence." She walked away then, heels crunching the gravel, back into the warmth of a world that had closed its doors to me. I didn't follow. I stood there staring into the tangle of trees, the breeze tugging at my coat like it wanted me to leave, too. Later that week I received a letter in the mail. Not from her. From our mother. It was handwritten on floral stationery, the kind she used for birthdays and thank you notes. The handwriting was tight, precise, the tone clipped. "We understand that you feel hurt, but pressing charges against your sister was extreme. Families are supposed to protect each other. Emily is getting her life back together, and we would appreciate it if you stopped dragging things out. This is not healthy. Maybe you should talk to someone about it." There was no mention of the loans, no acknowledgement of what I had lost. Just a polite request for silence, delivered with the thinly veiled contempt of someone who believed closure was a matter of inconvenience. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Weeks passed. I moved through the wreckage of my life with quiet determination. I spoke with lawyers, disputed fraudulent entries on my credit report, worked double shifts to rebuild savings that had been siphoned dry. I sold furniture, canceled subscriptions, downgraded everything. I lived lean, lived careful, and I told no one how much it hurt. Grief comes in strange forms. It isn't always tied to death. Sometimes it arrives when the living bury you in their memory, when the people you trusted decide your pain is less important than their comfort. Sometimes it's not about what you lose, but who chooses not to stand beside you when the losing begins. But I kept going. I started therapy. Not because my mother suggested it, but because I needed a place where my reality wasn't questioned. My therapist, a quiet, attentive woman named Mara, listened without judgment. When I described the betrayal, she didn't interrupt. When I mentioned the loneliness, she didn't offer platitudes. She said something instead that stayed with me. "Boundaries," she said, "are the last act of love before letting go." I held on to that, repeated it when the guilt flared, whispered it when the silence grew unbearable, because despite everything, I had loved them. I had wanted to forgive. But you cannot heal what someone refuses to admit they broke. So I focused on myself. Rebuilt, reclaimed, rerouted the dreams that had been detoured. It was slow, grueling work, but it was mine, untouched, honest. And still they called me heartless. Let them. Because I could breathe, and I wasn't done yet. Home had become a mirage, familiar in outline but alien in substance. The streets of my childhood neighborhood hadn't changed much in appearance. The same cracked sidewalks split beneath the pressure of oak roots. The same faded stop signs leaned at awkward angles, still unread by half the teenagers speeding past them. Yet the atmosphere was different now, denser, unwelcoming, as though even the air remembered and recoiled. It was autumn when I returned, months after the funeral. The leaves had turned the kind of brittle orange and burnt red that almost looked artificial. I had come back not for reconciliation, but out of necessity. There were documents locked in a safe at my parents' house. Birth certificates, medical records, a few heirloom items stored away with the presumption that family would always be an anchor, never an anvil. I'd called ahead, left a message asking for a window when the house would be empty. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want Emily. I just wanted my things. The message went unanswered, of course. Silence was their new language. But silence didn't nullify my right to reclaim what was mine. The key still worked. That surprised me more than it should have. I half expected the lock to have been changed, or the entry to be booby-trapped with passive aggression, but the door opened like it always had, slowly, creaking just above the hinge, revealing the dim hallway where family photos still clung to the walls like ghosts who refused to leave. I stepped inside and hesitated. The smell hit me first. Not bad, just stale, as though no one had aired the place out since the funeral. A mix of old dust, faint lemon cleaner, and something softer, lavender maybe, my mother's scent, embedded into the house like the signature at the bottom of a painting. I moved quickly, avoiding the temptation to look too long at any one thing. The living room was just as I remembered. Beige walls, doily-covered armrests, the television cabinet still displaying that cracked porcelain ballerina my sister broke as a child, and I took the blame for. I passed it without pausing. Upstairs, I went to the study. The safe was there, behind a framed print of Monet's water lilies, hinged like a secret door. I opened it and took what I came for: papers, a small jewelry box, a worn leather folder containing financial records I'd need for the credit repair agency. I worked efficiently, methodically, trying to pretend this was just a storage unit, not the house I once thought I'd bring my children to one day. I was almost finished when I heard the door open downstairs. Footsteps. Light, hesitant, but unmistakably approaching. My pulse quickened. I shut the safe, tucked everything into my bag, and moved toward the staircase. I paused at the top, uncertain if I should speak first or wait. I didn't need to. She beat me to it. "I thought I might find you here." Emily's voice floated up the stairs like smoke, soft, dangerous in its disarming tone. She appeared at the base, dressed in jeans and a loose sweater, phone clutched in one hand. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her makeup natural. To a stranger, she looked harmless. To me, she looked like a trigger with a smile. I descended slowly. We met at the bottom step, tension thick between us, silence stretching like wire ready to snap. "I didn't come to talk," I said. "I left a message." "I got it." "So why are you here?" She shrugged. "This is still my home, too." I wanted to laugh at that. Wanted to point out that she hadn't lived here in years, that she'd abandoned this place emotionally long before I ever did. But I didn't. The battle lines were drawn long ago. We both knew where we stood. "I'll be gone in a minute." She nodded, but didn't move. Her eyes swept over my bag, lingering. "Are you taking the photo albums?" I blinked. "What?" She gestured vaguely toward the hallway. "The albums. The ones from when we were kids. You used to say you wanted them when Mom passed." My chest tightened. "No, just documents. I'm not interested in rewriting the past." Her expression faltered, just for a moment. Then she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and stepped aside. "I guess you think that's all I've ever done. Rewrite things. Isn't it?" I couldn't stop the bitterness from bleeding into my voice. "You rewrote the story so well, even you believe it now." She flinched barely, but recovered quickly. "You think I wanted any of this? You think I enjoyed watching everything fall apart?" "I think you wanted a shortcut," I snapped. "And when it didn't work out, you used your tears as currency." Her eyes darkened. "You act like you've never made mistakes." "Not like yours." Another silence, longer this time. She leaned against the wall, crossing her arms, her gaze pinned to a spot on the floor. "I didn't come to fight," she said quietly. "Then what did you come for?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I thought, maybe if we saw each other something would shift." "You mean maybe I'd forgive you?" She didn't answer. I sighed. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's not something I owe you because we share DNA." "You think I don't know that?" Her voice cracked. "You think I haven't spent every night replaying what I did?" "I think you replay the version that makes you feel better." That landed. Her mouth set into a thin line, her eyes glistening. For a second, she looked like she wanted to scream, or cry, or collapse into some version of herself that once knew how to apologize. But the moment passed. She straightened, put her armor back on. "I'm trying to be better," she said. "I'm in counseling. I'm working. I even paid back one of the accounts." I stared at her. "You think that erases everything?" "No," she said, suddenly fierce. "But maybe it means I'm not the monster you've made me out." "Emily," I said calmly now, the anger drained, replaced by something colder, heavier. You stole from me. You lied to our entire family. And when I tried to protect myself, you painted me as a villain. That's not just a mistake. That's a pattern. One I'm done enabling. Her breath hitched. I saw the words she wanted to say bubble beneath the surface. Defensive, desperate, maybe even sincere. I think I'll be okay, I said. That's what matters. And then I walked out. The wind had picked up outside, scattering leaves across the driveway in lazy spirals. I got into my car, started the engine, and stared at the house for a moment longer. It no longer felt like mine. Not because I had changed, but because I had outgrown the version of myself who needed its walls to feel safe. Driving away, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no swelling music, no cathartic epiphany. Just a quiet sense of survival, of progress measured in slow, painful steps. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was finally moving in the right direction. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, documents spread out before me, organizing what would be a long, bureaucratic journey toward financial recovery. My phone buzzed, a message from a blocked number. I'm sorry, I really am. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd heard that song before. And this time, I was changing the station. Healing, I was learning, wasn't a clean process. It was messy, unforgiving. Some days you move mountains. Other days, you move from your bed to the kitchen and call it victory. But through it all, you learn. You learn to stop bleeding for people who won't even bandage their own wounds. You learn to protect your peace, even when they call it selfish. You learn that forgiveness is not a surrender. It's a decision to no longer let pain dictate your future. And most of all, you learn that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and not look back. Time has a strange way of dulling the sharpest betrayals, not erasing them, not forgiving them, but wrapping them in gauze until the sting becomes manageable. The pain never really leaves. It simply finds quieter places to live within you. By the time winter thawed into spring, and the trees started blooming outside my apartment window, I had learned to live with the silence. I had stopped expecting apologies, stopped hoping the people I loved would ever understand what I had lost, or who I had become in the aftermath of it all. The credit damage had taken nearly a full year to claw back from. What the fraud department and legal filings didn't restore, I rebuilt piece by piece, sending documents, making appeals, negotiating with banks. I took side jobs, worked weekends, cut expenses until the seams of my life felt stitched together with string. But I did it. Not with anyone's help. Not with forgiveness. Not with reconciliation. I did it with sheer resolve, something Emily had mistaken for coldness, but was really just survival. I no longer flinched when I saw her name, no longer paused when I passed old family photos buried in digital folders or flicked past them in boxed-up memories. I had learned the difference between grief and longing, between what we miss and what we needed to let die. Because family, as I came to understand, is not a guarantee. It's not a right. It's a choice, made again and again by the people who prove they deserve a seat at your table. Emily lost hers the day she chose convenience over truth, manipulation over integrity. And the rest of them, the ones who called me heartless, who clung to her fiction because it was easier than facing the reality, lost theirs when they turned their backs in chorus. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for almost 10 months when I received the invitation. It arrived in the mail, addressed in looping cursive to an old variation of my name, one Emily had used when applying for the fraudulent cards. The irony wasn't lost on me. The envelope was thick, expensive. Inside was an embossed card announcing her engagement. She was getting married in late spring, at the very vineyard we'd once driven past as teenagers, fantasizing about fairy tale weddings and endless energy drinks. I hadn't known she was dating anyone seriously. Then again, there was very little I knew about her anymore. At the bottom of the invitation was a note. I hope you'll come. It would mean a lot to me if you were there. Maybe we can start fresh. Emily. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. It was a plea for a reset, the same way a child might flip the board mid-game and ask to begin again without acknowledging they'd been cheating all along. I held the invitation in my hand for a long time, studied it, thought about the cost of saying yes, not just the time and travel, but the erosion of boundaries I had bled to protect. I imagined standing there, surrounded by people who still believed her version of things, who smiled at her lies and saw my absence as evidence of bitterness rather than self-respect. I imagined being a prop in her narrative, another piece of borrowed forgiveness she could wave around like a trophy. Then I imagined saying no, and I smiled. I didn't attend the wedding. Instead, on that warm April afternoon, I booked myself into a coastal cottage 3 hours away from the city, a place I had never been but always meant to visit. I arrived with no fanfare, no expectations, just a bag packed with books and notebooks and silence. The ocean was close enough to smell, its breeze drifting through the cracked windows like an invitation to exhale. And I did. I spent the morning walking along the shore, toes brushing cold water, sunlight dappling the surface in fractured gold. There were no photographers, no speeches, no family drama. Just me, unbothered, whole, free. That night, I cooked a small dinner, poured a glass of tea, and read through a journal I had kept during the thickest part of the fallout. Entries filled with disbelief, rage, sadness so deep it nearly drowned me. I didn't cry. I didn't relive the pain. I simply read it, closed it, and placed it gently in the drawer beside the bed. Letting go is never about forgetting. It's about refusing to carry the weight that was never yours to begin with. In the months that followed, my life changed in small but profound ways. I took a new job, less pay, more meaning. I joined a hiking group, started therapy again, began writing in earnest. Not just journals or venting, stories, characters with scars and teeth, narratives where betrayal was not the end but the forge from which strength emerged. I met people, real people, not bound by blood but chosen through shared values. Friends who saw my resilience, not my rage. Partners in healing who didn't flinch when I talked about the fracture that ran through my family like a fault line. They didn't need me to be perfect or forgiving or soft in all the right places. They let me be whole and flawed and free. Emily never reached out again after the wedding. I sometimes imagine she tells people we drifted apart, that we had a falling out over something silly. I don't mind. Let her rewrite the story again. Let her live inside the fiction where she's the heroine. I've stopped trying to edit other people's versions of me. I've stopped justifying the chapters they skipped over. Because the truth is not a contest. It is a sanctuary. And I live in it now. One evening, almost a year to the day since I filed the police report that set all this in motion, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, smaller, cozier, but mine in every sense of the word, and watched the city light up like 1,000 silent promises. I thought of everything I had lost. Then I thought of what I had gained. Peace, autonomy, clarity. I had no more messages to send, no explanations left to give. The story was no longer about her, or them, or what they failed to see. It was about me, and I was finally home.